Welcome. It's great to see folks. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I'm going to get us started. My name's Amy Antonucci, and I am the chair of the board of the New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund, and really pleased to welcome you to our program on October 15th, 2025, Divestment as a Tool for Change with Noam Perry. I'm going to start with some acknowledgements. First being an acknowledgement that we do our work in New Hampshire on the traditional ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples. We honor with gratitude the land and the water and those people who have been in relationship for many generations. Next, I want to acknowledge and thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event, which I hope I have the full list here. We kept getting others, so we'll see. But these are at least amongst our co-sponsors. Thanks to Jewish Voice for Peace, Vermont, New Hampshire, American Friends Service Committee of New Hampshire, the Community Church of Durham, the United Church of Christ Movement for Palestine Solidarity, the New Hampshire Council of Churches, 350 New Hampshire, UCC Peace with Justice Advocates, and Southern New Hampshire Indivisible. Quick update on tonight's Zoom guidelines. We love when your video is on, we are recording it. So, make choices about what you feel comfortable with. But we do love seeing folks here. Your audio will be muted to start with. The chat is going to be open for you to put your questions in if you want to as they occur to you. But we will, before long, be getting to Q&A when I'll also have hand raising and unmuting as an option. So let me introduce our speaker to you. So Noam Perry is the Strategic Research Coordinator of the American Friends Service Committee's Action Center for Corporate Accountability. He coordinates the Investigate project, researching corporate complicity in state violence and human rights violations. This includes the U.S. prison, border, and surveillance industries, as well as the military occupation and apartheid in Palestine, Israel. Before joining AFSC, Noam was teaching in the Human Rights Program at San Jose State University. He was born and raised in Tel Aviv and holds degrees in physics and geography from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and then a PhD in law and public policy from Northeastern University in Boston. So he has quite a varied background of learning and living in different places, and we're really pleased that he's bringing all this knowledge to us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Noam, visibly if you can, and I will turn it over to him. Remember to unmute, and I will mute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's rare, actually, that people read my entire bio in the beginning of events. And as you were reading it, it sounds like I have ADHD. I've jumped around from one topic to another. And I might, yeah. But anyway, it's great to be here. I appreciate being invited to speak with you tonight. And I'll start with some overview and introduction to how we approach divestment and what we do as an organization. And then I hope we can have a vibrant conversation, and hopefully you have some questions, and we'll definitely spend a lot of time with whatever you're bringing to this meeting. So I will start by introducing my organization, even though some of you might be familiar with American Friends Service Committee. We have presence in New Hampshire. We have presence in many places in the United States and around the world. It's a Quaker organization, even though I'm not Quaker myself. The organization is more than 100 years old. It was established in 1917. And Palestine is one of our core issues that we keep working on, justice in Palestine. ever since 1948. So we were invited by the United Nations in 1948. The United Nations was a very new organization, 3 years old or even less. And the Nakba happened as part of the war in 1948. And AFSC was invited to uh, create the first refugee camps in the Gaza Strip. And after about a year and a half of doing that work, they decided to leave. It's a story that we cherish today and we're very proud of, because the program that handled that on the ground said that the Palestinian refugee problem is not a humanitarian crisis. It's a human-made political problem, and the solution is clear. They should be allowed to return to their homes. And they decided that even though humanitarian work was and still is a core part of our work, we don't want to be involved in delaying that solution. And they just left. And that led to the creation of UNRWA, which until today handles the Palestinian refugee crisis. But we kept program work in Palestine and Israel. We still have a program in Jerusalem and in Ramallah, and we have a program in Gaza. We have 2 staff people in Gaza, Firas and Serena. They before the genocide started, they had a youth program. And once the genocide began, they switched to doing humanitarian relief work full time. We became one of I think, the 5th largest organization in terms of how much humanitarian support we have provided during the genocide, which is not really a testament to how great we are. It's more of a testament to how little humanitarian support was available, because we're not in any means big in terms of global humanitarian relief organizations. Both Firas and Serena have lost many family members, and we have staff in the United States who also are from Gaza, and all of them have lost a lot of people. So we do this work for political reasons and also for personal reasons. And if you want to learn more in general about what AFSC does, about Gaza and about Palestine in general, there's a link here at the bottom, afsc.org/crisis Gaza. And probably the best way to connect with us is through our weekly action hours that happen every Friday, that you're welcome to attend, to register for. We just had our 100th. We started them when the genocide started 2 years ago. And it's a great place to get updates from the ground and also take action collectively together. Now, I'm part of the organization, as Amy said, that is called the Action Center for Corporate Accountability. And what you see now is our flagship product. It's called investigate.info. And it's a database of companies that are involved in Israeli apartheid, genocide, and the ongoing military occupation. We created this tool specifically as a way to support divestment, to make divestment possible. And I can explain more later if there's interest. But if you're interested in any particular company, or if you want to see the divestment shortlist for the BDS movement, I encourage you to check out investigate.info. In addition, we created this separate page specifically when the student encampments were happening when they started in April and May of last year. And it's a kind of quick and dirty guide on divestment, mainly written with students in mind, but it can also be applicable to other settings. And it explains how institutions divest, what divestment means, what kind of support we offer. One of the things that we do, for example, is a weekly office hour session where we invite activists and organizers to come and tell us what they're struggling with, not individual people, not if you're concerned about your own investments, but if you're part of an organization or if you're part of a campaign and you're stuck or you just have questions, you can come to us and we'd love to work with you. And at the bottom of that page where it says divestment achievements is a running list of all the divestment wins, achievements, moves forward that have happened since the beginning of the genocide. It's not completely up to date because the last thing there, I think, right now is the Northampton, Massachusetts win. But after that, we already had two other ones, one in Alameda County in California and one in Dublin, California. So it's hard to keep track of these things, but we try to do our best. So what does divestment mean and what does it look like? And I want to qualify that by saying that people use the word divestment in different ways. And what we specialize in and what we have come to develop expertise in is divestment in investment portfolios. You know, when institutions invest in the stock market, we can help them divest. That's what we specialize in. However, and that would be the main focus of what I will talk about today. And at the same time, divestment can have different meanings. So divestment for some people could mean a company divests from Israel, or a university cutting ties with a company not in the investment portfolio, but in a different way, right? Maybe cutting a contract. All these are types of divestments, and we can help with those too. But when we talk about divestment in the stock market, the specific action of withdrawing our investments in specific companies or entities, it starts and it should include some policy change. So before we start talking about what should the institution, I'll say institution, it can be a university, a city, a union, a county, an organization that has an endowment, any institution with investments. I'll kind of talk about them collectively as institutions or institutional investors. And we want them to change their policy. Every institution that has investments has an investment policy statement. That's the name of the document that they all have. That says what they can and cannot invest in, and what the it's mostly a financial document. It mostly says like these are financial benchmarks. This is how we want to measure ourselves. This is the composition. We want 30% in stocks, 30% in bonds, some real estate, some private equity. All that is good and nice, and they all need that. And some institutions, and increasingly more of them, have some language that says something about ethics in investment. And that has different flavors. Some call it socially responsible investing. Some call it ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance factors in investing. There could be different parts. Mostly this started in the faith investors, and my organization is a faith organization, and we have investments, and we're part of the faith investor community. And in Europe, it's very mainstream to have socially responsible investment policies. And in the United States, we're lagging a bit behind, but it's still a growing trend even in the United States. And what we want the institutions to do is if they don't have that, they have to create that, some kind of language that allows them to consider non-financial considerations, right? To say that, yeah, we care about the bottom line. Of course, we care about the returns of the investments, but we also allow ourselves to take under consideration other things that we care about for other reasons. So if they don't have that, they need to have that. And we want it to be specific. We want it to say that they care about Palestine, if they're able to do that, or at the very least that they care about human rights as they are defined in international law. So we have some sample language here, which we developed, which a lot of the campaigns that we work with pitch. And if you go back to the resource I suggested earlier with the list of all the wins that we've had, you'll see that some of them adopted language that's identical or very similar to this. And some of them did something different. Some institutions are not in a position where they can say that they can take a stand politically and publicly about Israel and Palestine. And so they do something else. They talk about human rights, or some of them decided to divest from war and weapons, which means that they only look at some part of the divestment list, but not another. And in general, we are okay with letting investors take things at their own pace. This is a hard decision politically, sometimes financially, sometimes technically, and we want them to do what they can do. It's very easy for them to say, no, we can't do anything. We want them to figure out what they can do. So that's the first thing. That's what we want a policy change. And then we want them to commit to a process to slowly, prudently, safely align their actual investments with this new policy that they've created. And that can be very easy and quick, can take a week if they have a very simple investment portfolio, or it can take months or even years. And this process is ongoing. My organization, the AFSC, divested for Palestinian rights for the first time in 2008 as a response to the BDS call that I'll talk about in a few minutes. And it's still an ongoing conversation. So we have a committee that monitors that, and we have conversations about what that means still. We have conversations about specific companies, and it should be, and it always is, an ongoing discussion. Divestment is not a one-time, we're selling this and we're done. And then the third part is we want some measures of accountability to the public as much as possible, right? So we want the institution or organization to report on how it's doing, maybe once a year, maybe to the public, or maybe to just a broad sector of the organization. We want people to be able to see what's going on. Otherwise, it's really hard to celebrate something that we don't know is actually happening. So this is our kind of recipe for what divestment could look like. And we get many people who are many campaigners, many people, many organizers. Some of them have been doing this work for many years, and sometimes we need to convince them, and then they need to convince the institution that they're targeting, why do this? It's so much work, so much of a headache. Why should we do this? So the first reason is because it has an impact, and it doesn't have an immediate financial impact. I want to clarify that. So when a large institution, let's say, sells stocks of Caterpillar, for example, Caterpillar doesn't feel it, right? Nobody knows about that. Nobody knows that happened, unless it's a really heavy investor who maybe owns, let's say, more than 1% of the company, which is very rare in the types of targets that we work with. So the impact on the companies is there, but it's indirect, and it looks more like potential risk for the company, reputational risk for sure. Companies don't like the headline that such and such university decided to divest from them, and further along the line, there's risk of what is called a social license to operate. Companies want to be able to do whatever they want, be able to donate to whatever politician they want to donate, advocate for whatever policy they want to make. And the more we isolate them and the more we reduce their circle of influence, the less likely they are to influence policy. We saw that very clearly with the tobacco divestment campaign. It's not like tobacco companies don't exist anymore, because a lot of investors have pulled their investments. But it's really hard now for a progressive politician to accept money from a tobacco company, right? They would need to work really hard to justify that. So that's the impact on the companies. And the impact on Israel is, of course, very substantial, because we know that Israel pours a lot of money and a lot of effort to prevent it from happening. All the work they've been doing on campuses, all the work that they're doing to undermine our work in investor circles, and they do that a lot, is because they think that we're being impactful. So if they don't like what we do, I think we're on the right track. So that's the impact. The other major reason is that divestment really opens the door for us to win. And for years or decades, and some of you might remember, what the Palestinian struggle looked like in the United States in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. It was raising awareness through different kinds of events, appealing to the UN, appealing to different types of things. There was not much traction. People knew about it. We couldn't have campaigns that win. And it's really crucial for a movement to have campaigns that win. It brings more people in, it creates momentum, it has an impact on the target, like we just said. So what BDS did was to, in my view, revolutionize the Palestine liberation or Palestine solidarity movement in the United States by making it winnable. All of a sudden, we have actionable items. We have targets that are local that we can influence. And with divestment, especially, any institution that has investments can divest. So we are all surrounded by institutions that we could target if we want to. And we should decide carefully what institutions we should target. A lot of times, people think they need to target the biggest institution or the biggest investor in Israel or in companies that are on the short list, and that's not typically the smartest thing to do. We need to find institutions where we have power or where we can build power, because that's where we can win. And we need small wins before we can get to the bigger wins. The other benefit of divestment is that, again, every institutional investor has an investment policy and they review it periodically, typically once a year, sometimes every other year. So if you compare it, for example, to the movement we had 2 years ago of asking cities to endorse a ceasefire, many cities said, well, yeah, we think there should be a ceasefire, but it's not our business to say that. It's not our thing. We're a city in California, in Maine. How is it our business? How is it the city's business to say something about a ceasefire in the Middle East? Once you bring it to their investments, it's their business. It's their money, it's their business, and we can ask them to take a stand because if it's a city, it's our money actually that they're holding for us. And because they periodically review their investments anyway, that gives us intervention points. We don't need to wait for them to put it on the agenda. We can just come to the meeting where they review their investments anyway and speak about this, right? So there are all these benefits to divestment campaigns that don't exist in other types of campaigns. And the third why, and maybe the most important, is that that's what Palestinians have actually asked us to do. Right? The origin of divestment campaigns is the Palestinian call from 2005. This is the largest ever coalition of Palestinian civil society organizations. Palestinian society is heavily fragmented by design because of Israel's actions and policies. And so they have come together really in an unprecedented way 20 years ago and 3 months and called on us to divest. And to divest in similar ways to how we've divested from South Africa. And that we still work very closely with the leadership of the BDS movement. They still exist. It's not like they issued a call and went away. They still have a governance body that still includes all the major Palestinian trade unions, many different Palestinian factions and organizations. So I want to talk about some common places where we see that that campaigners and institutions get stuck, and some of them I already mentioned. The first one specifically, right? I can't emphasize that enough. We want to find targets that are movable, where we have influence. For students, it's obviously the university. For residents of a city, it's the city. If you're in a church, it might be your church, right? Place where we have a voice, place where we can move things, not a place that we are not a constituent of. And again, we're not looking for big financial impact because the impact of divestment is not financial. We're looking for a win. That's a very important distinction. We want to prioritize divestment over disclosure. A lot of campaigns start with just trying to figure out what their target is invested in, and that's a worthwhile research project. And sometimes it's a dead end. Most times, actually, they don't have to disclose what they're invested in. And a lot of times people get stuck on that. How can we ask to divest if we don't know even if they're invested in Caterpillar, for example? And the reality is it's easier to get divestment than to get disclosure. There are many reasons why they don't disclose what they invest. It's actually the industry in the investment world, that's the norm. Nobody shares their investment portfolio unless they're mandated to by some law or regulation. Uh, but they all can divest, even without telling us exactly what they're invested in. In terms of research, we see a lot of groups getting stuck on the research part, thinking that they have to create a new portfolio or suggest alternatives, switching funds, really look into the financial impact. It's not our job. Our job is to figure out how to get the institution that we're targeting to want to divest. That's it. Once they want to, they'll figure it out. They have people they're paying good money to, consultants, investment professionals. They'll figure it out. It's not a bad thing to have some ideas so that if we're asked in a meeting, we can, kind of offer them. But we definitely don't need to do a lot of investment research. We do need to do a lot of campaign research. So if the target is a city, for example, who are the city council members? What are their known positions? Who is likely to vote yes? Who is likely to vote no? Who is a maybe? How can we influence them? Who do we know that knows them? What other issues they care about? All of that is very useful research that we have to do before launching a campaign and definitely before making it public. We want to focus on investment criteria or the investment criteria. And if we want to highlight one company, like for some reason Caterpillar is in my head today, we want to make sure that it's understood as an example. The companies and what they do offer us a great way to talk about what's happening on the ground. We care about Caterpillar because we care about the demolition of Gaza, and before that, the massive demolition of homes. We care about Boeing because we care about people getting killed with their bombs. So the company names are useful as examples because they give us an opportunity to share what's happening on the ground. But it's always clear that we're not just asking our target to divest from Boeing or Caterpillar. We're asking them to adopt a policy that says they don't want to be invested in genocide, apartheid, war crimes, whatever they can say. And then we can help them implement those criteria, right? The next point is we don't want to say no to a process or a committee automatically. And this came really loud and clear from the student movement. A lot of student encampments rejected the idea that there needs to be a process. And for many of our targets, they have to have a process. They cannot divest otherwise, right? To go to a city and just ask it to divest without discussing it, without weighing the implications, they cannot do that. So some processes are bad or are conducted in bad faith and are designed to waste our time. And part of the job of a campaign is to figure out when that happens and how to respond to that. But a process by itself is not necessarily a problem. Maybe the most important thing, other than maybe the first point is the most important, and this next one is the second most important, we have to have an inside strategy. Our movement is very good with outside strategies, protesting from the outside, yelling at people to divest, doing sit-ins in their offices. And we have to have an inside strategy. What does it mean to have an inside strategy? Talking to the people who actually matter, talking to the decision makers, the policy makers, understanding what their concerns are, understanding what makes them tick, what motivates them, how can we change their minds, having a separate channel of communication that is calm, that is very connected to what's happening on the outside, but is actually can produce some results, right? We typically can't do that, can't have results if we don't have some kind of inside track of communication. And that's really hard to do, especially if you're not organically connected to the institution that you're targeting. And the last point, which I'll just name, and we can talk about it later if you want, is we're very aware that there are anti-BDS laws, and most of the time they don't say what you think they say. They're designed to confuse us and to create a smokescreen and to create the illusion that divestment is either illegal or impossible. And in 90% of cases, it's not true. So don't worry about it until you actually read it and maybe have your lawyer friend or me help you understand what they mean. So I'll stop there. I know that was a lot, and we can come back to any of those points if you're interested. And I'll just say, Amy, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was extremely helpful. One thing that the various groups that I'm with are working hard on is getting better at strategy. So I really appreciate how, you laid out some of this and talked about really the specifics of what you do and how to do it strategically. And this whole idea that wins are important. I mean, it sounds a little silly, but it's not. It's not. So, okay. All right. We have already a question. Okay. So could you say more about the BDS laws are about? I guess maybe not everyone has been following that and knows there are actually anti-BDS laws. But yeah, I think some folks, am I understanding that question right? That people would just like more information on that? I'm looking
Oh,
around to see.
uh,
Yeah. Okay.
so this is a testament to how we're winning because Israel has lobbied for these laws, and many United States have enacted such laws. And they're typically called anti-BDS laws, even though they have different flavors and they do different things. By now, I believe 36 states out of the 50 in the United States have some version of an anti-BDS law. Most of the times, these were statutes that went through the legislature, and in a few times, it was an executive order by the governor. And these laws come in broad strokes in two flavors. One is what we typically call boycott the boycotters, and the other is divest from the divestors. But boycott the boycotters law would typically say something like the state of X does not want to do business or to have any contracts with companies that boycott Israel. And they typically have a really annoying definition of what boycotting Israel means. It's typically not what you think it means. It could apply, for example, to companies that have just decided to step away from their business in illegal settlements in the West Bank, right? That could be considered boycotting Israel, even though the company has a lot of business in Israel. So that's one flavor. And the other flavor is divest from the divestors, says that the state in its pension fund or in other state funds will not invest in companies that either boycott or have divested from Israel. It's essentially the opposite of what we're doing, right? It's we're asking to divest from apartheid. They're saying we will not invest, we will divest in companies that are supporting apartheid in a way, even though they're not saying it in that way. And I did look up the case in New Hampshire. So I'll just put it up. So you see, in New Hampshire, there wasn't a legislative attempt that didn't succeed. And then the governor issued an executive order. And this is the gist of it. This is literally a screenshot from the executive order. I think this happened maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, something like that, in 2023, before October. And what it says is any executive branch agency will not adopt an investment policy that would have the effect of requiring or inducing any person to boycott Israel, right? So this would impact if we were interested, for example, in divestment at the state level, right? If someone here is interested in taking on the New Hampshire pension fund, for example, this law might be a problem, or this executive order might be a problem, but it only impacts executive branch agencies. So someone would need to read Appendix 1 to see what that includes, right? Because the devil is always in the details. And we've also been able to ignore or circumvent these laws by saying, well, we're not asking to boycott Israel. We're asking to boycott apartheid. And in some cases that have worked. It also says, so it has multiple prongs, right? The second one says executive branch entities will not invest in companies that have boycotted Israel, right? and that executive branch agencies shall contract with a company. They cannot contract with a company that has boycotted Israel. So, you know, we can think about this um, executive order and how it might impact, may or may not impact what folks here are interested in doing. It's notable that I'm not aware of any current New Hampshire statewide uh, divestment campaign. Maybe there is, and you can educate me on that. But it wouldn't affect any city, right? Most of our wins in the U.S. have been at the city level. We have multiple cities in California, a few in Maine, a couple in Massachusetts, some in Ohio, and I think Michigan. I don't think I've seen a New Hampshire city that has divested. And this executive order doesn't say anything about that because a city is not an executive branch agency of New Hampshire, as far as I understand.
Thank you. That is very interesting. We did campaign around the BDS laws, anti-BDS laws. So I was wondering, can we take a kind of step back and have more of a definition, BDS? Can you break that down and talk about, yeah, I could use something as basic as what does BDS mean?
Absolutely. So BDS is shorthand for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And typically it refers back to that 2005 call that I mentioned earlier by Palestinian civil society to impose boycott, divestment, and sanctions motions on Israel that are similar to the ones that the world has taken against South Africa during apartheid. Boycott, just like the word divestment that I started with, can have different meanings for different people. All these words can have different meanings for different people. Boycott, typically, people think of as boycotting a company, right? So just like people were boycotting Shell and Coca-Cola during apartheid South Africa, there have been multiple boycott campaigns in the US and around the world that are focused on Palestine. Many of them were successful. We had a campaign targeting HP, a huge campaign. We had a campaign targeting SodaStream. There were a lot of them. I'm blanking out right now, but of course, we had a campaign on General Mills. All of these examples are examples of successful campaigns where the company actually did what we asked it to do. But a boycott can be also, when people hear the word boycott and divestment, they think, oh, boycott is for individual people and divestment is for institutions. And it makes sense on some level, but it doesn't have to be. Boycott can be institutional. For example, an organization can decide not to buy certain products from certain companies. That would be a form of an institutional boycott. And some people might call it divestment, and it's fine. It doesn't matter that much. Divestment we talked about. Sanctions is typically thought of as something that states can impose. So we all know that there are bad sanctions, right? Like sanctions that are trying to stifle the local economy and harm the people. And many human rights organizations came out against sanctions on Iraq at the time and Iran and North Korea. But there are sanctions that we support. And for example, all of the European countries that have put some limitations on weapons that they have been sending to Israel, Germany, Spain, who else? A few other countries in Europe that I'm forgetting right now. These are sanctions. These are forms of sanctions because they're imposing restrictions on another government. We would love it if the United States would come to that game of sanctions. And there is a bill actually in Congress, if you're not aware, the Block the Bombs bill, Block the Bombs Act, that was introduced in the House of Representatives and has more than 50, maybe 51, 52 co-sponsors, which is huge. The Palestinian rights movement has never had such support in Congress. So that is already a win, even though it likely will not pass, right? If we're honest, this bill, but it's still a win. It's building power, it's building leverage, it's splitting the Democratic Party, and we're able to hold them accountable to either say they'll support it or to say they will support continuing arming Israel, and then they will need to explain why. And I think it's becoming more and more hard for progressive Democrats to defend that position. Uh, so that would be if that passed, that would be a form of sanctions. That would be the S in BDS.
Thanks. I actually hadn't, we've been working a lot on 3565, the Block the Bombs Act, and I hadn't really. So the JRDs, the Joint Resolutions of Disapproval, are those sanctions as well?
They could be a form of sanction, although there's also an argument to be made that they're just a way to enforce existing U.S. law. The United States is in violation of its own laws by treating Israel differently than it treats any other country and continuing sending weapons to a country that violates international law in such a way. Yeah, the JRDs would also be a form of sanction if they passed.
Okay, interesting. So Dave is wondering, in terms of prioritized divestment over disclosure, how do you know to approach a company about divestment if they have not disclosed where their investments lie? So can you say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So with divestment, we typically don't target. So the ask from companies is to stop doing what they're doing in Israel, right? And we would know. I mean, we have research projects. My research project, Investigate, and we also have other research organizations that are tracking what companies are doing in Israel, in illegal settlements, specifically in Gaza. And then the ask from them is clear. We just want them to stop what they're doing. Microsoft is a recent example. We asked the company to do something and it did something a little bit smaller, but they did something, which is amazing. But with divestment in the investment sense, in the stock market, like I said earlier, the target is typically an institution with investments. So it's not a company, it's an investor. Investor can be a university, can be a church, can be a city, a union, an organization with an endowment like mine. And then we look at the investment policy statement. And if it doesn't say anything about having any ethical considerations on the investment, then we safely assume that they're invested in everything because that's the norm. So investors, by and large, want to diversify as much as possible their portfolio, and that means investing in everything that they can. So their universe of investments, that's what it's called, will be broad and will include everything, literally. All the harms in the world will be represented in their portfolio. And therefore we can tell them, well, you need to create a policy that addresses that says, put some restrictions on what you're invested in. And that can start a process where they maybe examine their investments and maybe they figure out this company we don't want to be invested in or this industry we don't want to be invested in. And if we are part of that process, or some of us are, then we can also learn about their investments more and identify what they have been investing in and how it's and what they are doing now. If they do have some clause in their investment policy that says anything about ethics or being responsible or being ESG, that acronym, and being mindful to environmental, social, and governance issues in their investments, then we try to understand what that language is and we ask them how it's implemented. And in some cases, it's not implemented. And in some cases, it's implemented, but it's very different than what we think a good ethical investment policy should look like. And so then the ask is to amend the policy. But in all these cases, we assume that if they don't say that they have deliberately divested from weapons, for example, it's 100% chance that they're invested in weapons. There's just no reason for them not to be unless they deliberately took the action of figuring out how not to do it.
That's Interesting, a little distressing. The strange thing to be the norm. Um, and I'm gonna skip around a little bit in the chat. I'll circle back, but wouldn't this apply to other situations than just Israel? I mean, that's a yes, right? And we want that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you, maybe it's not true anymore. I haven't done this exercise in a while, but definitely up until a year and a half ago, if you Googled the word divestment, the top 10 results would not show up Palestine. Mostly it would be about fossil fuels. That was the main divestment campaign and divestment effort in the United States. And it was very successful because divesting the groups that were working on divesting from the fossil fuel industry managed to frame it in a way that's not political or not at least not partisan. It's still mostly, it's still mostly one party that went for that than the other one. But the ask is just to not harm the planet. It's very neutral, it's very mainstream, it's very straightforward in that way. And so, yes, absolutely, we want all investors to also not invest in fossil fuels. We want all investors to have what we call it in our resources is that we want them to have a universal human rights policy. And if you go to the resources that I mentioned in the beginning, for example, that page afsc.org/divest, you'll see a reference there to an ethical investment policy, and it links to our investment policy that we worked on for decades and continue to work on because every once in a while there's a new issue that pops up. And so our investment policy addresses Palestine and Israel and specifically names those as concerns and names apartheid and the occupation. And it also addresses many other issues like the fossil fuel industry, like the prison industry, the prison industrial complex, the border and surveillance industries in the United States. More than 100 years ago, Quakers and Methodists were kind of in a competition about who was first, created the first screens. That's another word for divestment, and that's more mainstream in the investment circles. Negative screens, what companies were screening out, and it was then referred to as sin stocks, gambling, firearms, land speculation, things like that were considered sinful, and therefore Quakers thought they shouldn't be invested in them. And that's the origin, actually, of this whole universe of responsible investments. So yes, we want every institution to consider all of these things. And again, if you look at our list of wins, you'll see that some of them are laser focused on Palestine because that's what the activists wanted, and also that's what they got traction on. And some of the wins that we've had include other issues. Richmond, California, for example, I remember includes apartheid, the prison industry, and border militarization, and maybe other issues that I forget. It actually can be helpful to include more issues because it can, first of all, build a broader coalition. It makes it harder for elected officials to just say no if you're coming in with a broad coalition and all of a sudden it's not just the Palestine folks, it's everyone. It's people who are concerned about ICE and people who are concerned about prisons and people who are concerned about tobacco and people who are concerned about planet destruction and people who are concerned about housing crisis, and all of these people come together, all of these groups come together and they want you to think about your investments. That's a different story than, we're just talking about Israel, right? And it can also help the investors take action sometimes because for many institutions, the problem is not the financial or technical problem of like, how do we do this and can we afford it? Will we be losing money? These are considerations that they all have, but the much bigger consideration is the political implications, right? If we divest and we say that it's about Israel, what will happen? right? We will be going against the federal government. Maybe we'll be going against our state government. Maybe we'll lose funding. It's like a host of, maybe we'll lose our jobs. So many people have lost their jobs because of this. And so these are, again, when we bring in universal language that addresses many issues, it's sometimes helpful for them to say, oh, yeah, this is not just about Israel. We're not singling out anything. We're addressing, we want to create a genuine ethical investment policy and portfolio. That can be very powerful sometimes.
That's really interesting. And coalition building is can be really useful, especially these days when we really need a lot of people involved. That's a great idea. And then you don't have to go back. Don't have to spend your time. First you go for Israel, then you go for fossil fuels, then you go for. Oh, okay, that's really interesting. I want
That
to.
that 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 last part can also be very appealing to the middle people. There's the movement people, the activists, and there's the targets, which are usually, if it's a city, it's like the council members or the elected officials, right? And then there's the staff, the city manager, the city treasurer, all these people who are actually going to implement this. And they typically bring in it's a slippery slope. Today you're coming in with this issue, we'll do this. Tomorrow you'll come with a different issue. And for them too, it can be very powerful to say, no, we agree with you. We don't want it to be a slippery slope. We want it to be a universal blanket policy that will help you conduct yourself and manage your money better for the future in the future.
Great, thank you. I want to get Mohammed's question in here. He's been waiting a while. So, okay, BDS that targets any Israeli. Okay, let me think. BDS targets any Israeli investment in the West Bank, which is occupied land. Hence, wouldn't the executive order you read be illegal in terms of?
Yes. Yes.
Is the answer yes?
It's not. It's not. It's strictly. I wouldn't say it's illegal. I'm not a lawyer, but I have some interactions with legal documents. I wouldn't say it's illegal. I would say it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent with international law, and a lot of the things that the U.S. government does are inconsistent with international law. There's not much respect for international law in the United States. The United States. This is not just about Palestine. This is about everything. The United States historically and explicitly sees itself as above or unrelated to the system of international law. So they don't see it as a problem. And if we were in Europe, for example, the conversation would be different. If we were in the European Union, because the European Union has the European Court for Human Rights, which supersedes state courts, right? So if this clause appeared in, let's say, France or some other country in Europe, people could sue or challenge it in the domestic court system. And if it fails, they can go to the European Court of Human Rights, and that ruling would be binding on the particular country or state. And in the United States, that mechanism doesn't exist. So the most it can go is the U.S. Supreme Court, and we know what would happen there.
Yeah, okay. Let me just remind folks who come to the Monday nights and are used to our 1 hour format that tonight is actually an hour and a half. So we're going to keep moving through. We have plenty of time to get through all this. That was the point. We wanted this to be a bit of a workshop so people could really delve in. So just for those of you who are thinking, oh my gosh, it's about to end. It's not. So I'm going to let Moji ask his question, and then we'll go back to more in the chat. Go ahead, Moji. It should be, yeah, there you go.
Hi, Noam. Thank you for beautiful presentation. I've been thinking about narratives and counter narratives. And as you know, one of the narratives that is pushed to justify the genocide and the apartheid and all that is the narrative of whoever who is against us is anti-Semitic. So I am wondering if there is a way to try to say, no, actually what Israel and with the support of the US is doing is anti-Semitic. Is there any way that you can think to translate that to, for example, figure out a way to say we are sanctioning anti-Semitic investments, but the meaning of anti-Semitic would be those companies, those investments that help Israel continue doing what it does, and therefore it is anti-Semitic. I just want to plant that seed to see if there is a way in the investment universe to which I am totally unfamiliar. Is there a way to try to implement that counter narrative?
Yeah, I I have to say I agree with you that many of the things that Israel and the United States currently are doing is anti-Semitic. And it harms me as a Jewish person and harms my family. And with the same breath or at the same time, I would say I don't think we want to go against the mainstream Jewish institutions in the United States and who has the authority to define what anti-Semitism is. So I would leave that work to organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now, Shoresh, which is a newer organization of Israelis living in the United States. They are best positioned to do this work. And I wouldn't go again. I wouldn't want to, let's put it this way. I wouldn't want someone who is not Jewish to stand in front of a city council chamber, for example, and argue with the representative of the ADL about what is or is not anti-Semitism. We should recognize also that this whole accusation of anti-Semitism is a distraction, right? They have weaponized anti-Semitism because they've seen how powerful it is to shut down the conversation, to shut us down. And so I don't want to play that game. I think it's useful for Jewish Voice for Peace to play that game, and I'm a proud member of Jewish Voice for Peace as well. And I talk about anti-Semitism when I'm speaking for Jewish Voice for Peace. But in those meetings about investments, honestly, I wouldn't bring it up. I wouldn't bring it up, first of all, at all, unless it's brought up by someone else. And if it's brought up by someone else, I would say, just read the language we're proposing and tell me how it's anti-Semitic. It's not convincing. Once you look at the actual language that we're proposing, that typically activists come with to their university or to their council meetings or pension funds, this argument doesn't hold water, and anyone who is reasonable can understand it and can see through that argument. So the only people who make that argument are either our opponents or our elected officials who are influenced by our opponents, and they're not our audience. We will not convince them. So we need to convince the moderates and the swing votes, and we should prepare them beforehand. That's why the insight strategy is so important. We have to prepare them beforehand that this will come up, or that it may come up, very likely, and that it's a smokescreen, and that we don't, we should prep them for that. And if it, in most cases, it's worked. It's really a non-argument once you start looking at it. Is it anti-Semitic? Of course it's not. But I don't think it's good politics, and I also don't think it's very useful to butt heads against an organization like the Zionist Organization of America or the ADL or AIPAC and defining what anti-Semitism is. We'll lose that battle, and then it's not useful to anyone.
All right, thank you both. That's an interesting conversation here to think on this. Sharon is wondering what state you live in, Noam, and is there progress in your state?
I live in Missouri, so unfortunately there's zero progress. I live in Kansas City, Missouri, and it's a heavily red state. We have two, we have two kind of bluish pockets. One is St. Louis and one is Kansas City. But other than that, our state politics is very very red, very Republican, and even the Democrat pockets, they're very they're not in the progressive caucus, let's put it that way. So no, I don't know of anything that's happening. I know there's a campaign in St. Louis that's targeting the city of St. Louis, and I hope they'll succeed. And we haven't, in Kansas City, we haven't been able to identify, like our city council will not do anything for this. But before I lived in Missouri, I lived in the Bay Area, and that's where we've had maybe the most successes of city divestment wins and universities.
All right, thank you. Here we've got one from Sheila. This is interesting. What is your response when someone argues that boycotts against a company, for example, SodaStream, negatively impact the Palestinians who work for the company and might lose their jobs?
Yeah, we've seen that argument with SodaStream. We've seen that argument with General Mills. It doesn't hold water. It's not the reality of what happens. And again, we're doing this because Palestinians have asked us. And the Palestinian organizations that have asked us to do this include the Palestinian unions that represent these workers. So again, this argument is typically made in bad faith, not in good faith. And we shouldn't buy into that. The people who raise this argument are typically not interested in Palestinian human rights. They are interested in shutting down the conversation. You'll never hear a Palestinian saying these arguments. You'll only hear the pro-Israel crowds using that argument. And that should tell you that that's where the sides are, right? In reality, what happened with SodaStream, for those who don't know, I think this happened exactly 10 years ago, 2015, if I remember correctly. SodaStream had a factory in an illegal Israeli settlement in the West Bank. There was a big campaign to get them out of there, and they left. And they left specifically because of that campaign. And the workers retained their jobs. They just had to. So it's more complicated than that, actually. So that they relocated the factory into what's sometimes called Israel proper or 48. Basically outside of the territories that were occupied in 1967. And then the company asked the government of Israel to issue work permits for their workers so that they could come to work. It's like maybe a 2-hour drive, right? They could come to work, and Israel refused, so that these workers would lose their jobs. So the workers didn't lose their jobs because of the campaign. The workers lost their jobs because Israel weaponized its work permit system to deny these workers a work permit. And the CEO of that company was very open in saying that it was because of Netanyahu. It was Netanyahu back then, as it is now, for blaming Netanyahu for that. And then later, after all the noise about the campaign subsided, Israel eventually let the workers who still wanted, gave them permits, and they still work in the factory. So again, we need to be very savvy about which arguments are being made in good faith and which arguments we're hearing that are made in bad faith. And just ignore the ones that are made in bad faith, because they're only designed to confuse us, create a smokescreen, and shut down the conversation.
Thanks. Okay, the next one is, well, all right, I'll bring in Joanne's. This is a little different, but do you have a list of U.S. companies that are involved with nuclear weapons precisely?
Ooh, good one. I don't, but first of all the major, if you look at the top 10 US weapons manufacturers, they're all involved in the nuclear program in one way or another. So, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, RTX, L3 Harris, who am I forgetting? All of them are. And there is an organization, I haven't looked in a while, but Don't Bank on the Bomb. They have done this research, and I think they should have that list. And I can also add that when institutional investors want to divest from those companies, they can go to the place where they usually go to for this kind of information, which is commercial companies that collect these kinds of data for investors. The biggest name in that industry is MSCI, and the second largest is Morningstar. These are for-profit companies that specialize in collecting data and selling it to investors. And it's very easy. Both of them would offer a list that is called controversial weapons or banned weapons or something of that nature. And that would include all the companies that are involved in nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and other forms of banned or controversial weapons. And it's very mainstream to divest from them. So those products exist. And what we're trying to do is to create similar products that focus on Palestine, because the regular products that talk about human rights exclude Palestine or exclude Israeli human rights violations that affect Palestinians.
Okay, I have some specific questions here. Let me start with this one. Do you know of any local groups supporting divestment in Texas or specifically Houston? I am an ordinary person, but feel like there is potential to make some progress using the guidelines that you've delineated. Where can I learn more and find folks around me collaborate on a divestment project in my hometown?
That's a great question. I don't recall anyone. We had a group in Dallas that we worked with, but that was years ago. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. So, there are Palestine solidarity organizations in Houston, I'm sure. You can look up if there's a local Jewish Voice for Peace chapter. You can look up if there's a presence for DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. They work on divestment and BDS more broadly. You can look for, you can look at the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. They have connections all over the country, so they might be able to connect you. Who else has AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, another grassroots organization. I don't know if they're in Houston though, so you'll need to do a little bit of research to see who is around you. If there was a ceasefire resolution, for example, many cities have passed a ceasefire resolution, or at least had an attempt, and some of them failed. But if you Google, for example, Houston ceasefire resolution and see who presented it and what organizations worked on it, the same organization could work on divestment.
There is also a question, and as they say, it's not exactly for you, but I was wondering if anyone on the call is aware of efforts in New Hampshire around this, a city or organization. Can we learn from their experience? How can we help here in New Hampshire? And yes, there are a few things going on, not exactly what Noam was talking about though, which is why part of why we have him is that we are hoping to do more of this. There is a boy, I'm not sure. You can tell me what to call this, but it's around co-ops, food co-ops. Suddenly, the exact name of it. There is a group. What's that called? Do you
You're
know?
talking about deshelving? Are you looking for the word deshelving or
No.
Co-op,
Well, in any case, there's some folks in Keene who are working to get local food co-ops in here, and also I think over the border in Vermont, because we have the Brattleboro Food Co-op, and to get them to stop having Israeli products and instead have Palestinian products. So that is going on in New Hampshire. I'll see if I can look it up and put something in the chat. But other than that, I hope there are, but we haven't found them. But we would like to kind of bring some folks together to talk more about this and see how we can help each other. And after listening to you, it feels like one thing we could do is think, where do we know people on city councils, for instance, and start there. That sounds like the kind of thing that we would do. Am I following?
Yeah, or what have any cities in New Hampshire passed a ceasefire resolution in the last couple of years? That's a good place to start because it's the same politics, right? The same people who voted for a ceasefire 1 year, 2 years ago should vote for divestment now. I mean, it's the same, it would be the same political coalition work. You're also surrounded. For some reason, I don't know of any initiatives in New Hampshire, but you're surrounded by other states with large and thriving coalitions. So in Vermont, there's a big Palestine Solidarity Coalition that exists for decades and was very active on Ben and Jerry's, which was another successful campaign. And several towns in Vermont managed to declare that their towns would be apartheid free. That's another project that my organization helps run called Apartheid Free Communities. So you can look it up at apartheidfree.org. It's kind of a gateway to divestment or to other actions, right? So you'll see there that there's a pledge that we're asking institutions to take, that they would be apartheid free, and then we kind of leave it up to them to decide what it means for them. And if they have investments, then it might be natural that they could address it in their investment portfolio, or if they're a co-op, it might make sense for them to address it in the products they're carrying, right? It's very institution based. And then in Massachusetts, we've had multiple wins and there's multiple coalitions. There was the Northampton win, which I mentioned, that's very recent. The Massachusetts Teachers Association is one of the only examples that we know that have divested only from weapons. Not from apartheid or genocide or anything related to Israel, but from weapons, which is a big step forward. And Maine has a statewide coalition for Palestine that was working on a few cities. We have Portland, Maine divested, and then Belfast, I want to say, and maybe another town that I forget. And now there's a state bill in the Maine legislature targeting the state's funds. So you're surrounded by these campaigns and these people, and if nothing happened in New Hampshire yet, it doesn't mean that it needs to stay that way.
Yeah, here in New Hampshire, we have now the New Hampshire Coalition for a Just Peace in the Middle East. We're newer than some of those other ones. So we're still building power and doing work. And this, again, we've been more focused on legislative advocacy, but we really want to branch out. So the idea that folks here are interested in doing more is really great. And we might do like a follow-up meeting, not on camera, where we talk about what is going on and what we might plan to do together. So
yeah, right. And when you say legislative, you mean state legislative, because divestment is also legislative, but at the city level.
Right. Well, yeah. We've been more doing the like block the bombs kind of stuff, but yeah, we want to go bigger.
Or smaller.
Right. Broader. That's the
bolder.
Yeah. And it was, I found that campaign. It's the No Appetite for Apartheid.
No, that's a different thing. Oh, the co-op thing. No Appetite.
Yeah, that's the co-op thing. And there is, again, there is one in New Hampshire. I put a link in the chat. They're trying to collect signatures and they have a ways to go. So please check that out. And we can also help connect people if you're in the Keene area to the folks working on that. There was another question here. Where did it go? Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. and I think, Doug, that yes, you are right about this. So Doug is asking, well, an individual might look into their own 401k or other funds. It would seem this might be something a group would take on. And that's our understanding. Can you, Noam, just confirm that that's really what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, of course, as individuals, we need to care about where our money is invested. But especially if you're not billionaires or even millionaires, then you have very few options. Actually, you'll find out that divestment is really hard, especially if your investments are mainly in your pension fund. So we actually have very few options, and it's also not impactful. So you should care about where your money is invested. I care about where my money is invested, but I don't do it because I think it will have an impact on the world. I do it because it's my money and I want to feel good about it. But when we say divestment campaign, yes, we mean institutions. We want them to divest. We want them to be loud about it, to declare it. Otherwise, there's no impact.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, let's see. Joanne is asking, this is interesting. Can we anticipate a list in the hopefully near future of Palestinian organizations, projects calling for investors?
Calling for investors to do what? To divest?
No, to invest. She's wondering if there's going to be a flipping kind of a thing, a campaign to try to get money into Palestinian.
Oh, to invest in Palestine?
Yeah.
Palestinian companies or Palestinian funds? Yeah, I mean that's not my expertise. It's typically what investors call impact investing, meaning we're investing in something not necessarily because we think we will get a lot of returns on our money, but because we want to have a good impact on the world. And there are a number of Palestinian or Palestinian related impact investment funds or projects. I don't know enough about this to even name them or definitely recommend any of them, but they do exist. If you have money and you're looking for that, you can definitely find you can definitely find an investment professional who could help you with that. And there are investment networks now that didn't exist 2 years ago. There's Investors for Palestine, there's Freedom Funders, organizations or networks that connect together individual investors who are concerned and who want to think about how to handle their own money. Again, it's close to what I do, but it's not exactly what I do, because again, if it's an individual investor and there's no publicity, the impact is zero or very, very low. So that's again, it's not a waste of time. Of course, people should care about their money and where it's invested, but it's not specifically what I do.
Okay.
Oh, we do have, sorry, this does remind me. So in Alameda County, which is a very interesting story. Alameda County is in California. It's the county that has Oakland and Berkeley and a few other cities. The treasurer, so cities are typically very limited in what they can invest in. And so we quickly learned, and in California, they have to publish their investment portfolios, which is very helpful for us. So we very quickly learned that the only company that we have a problem with in the Alameda County portfolio is Caterpillar. And we had long conversations and a big campaign actually targeting the treasurer of Alameda County. And we convinced him, and he sold, it was bonds. He sold the Caterpillar bonds that the county had. And he invested them in exactly something like that, in a fund that invests money back into Palestine, the same amount of money. And I thought that was a very nice gesture and kind of a good model for how to do it. But it's not what we asked for. He did it on his own volition.
Interesting. Okay, we are mostly gotten through the questions. I actually have one. So when you say it's not actually about the money, that confuses me a little, I have to admit, because it
Yeah.
feels like it should be good to get. And isn't this one of the things that like 350 New Hampshire, not New Hampshire, 350 US wide, it felt like if the money that folks had invested would, do you know what I'm saying? That it actually would have an impact to move all that money away from these negative things. But that doesn't seem to be what you're saying. Can you clarify?
It can get there, and maybe for the environmental movement it has gotten there. That of course should be the goal. We definitely want to have a financial impact on Israel, on Israeli companies, and on companies that are involved in war crimes. That is the aspiration. And with the targets that we have engaged with so far, we are very, very, very far from that. So with all the boycotts and all the divestment motions that we had in the United States in the last 20 years, the only case where any BDS campaign had a financial impact on a company is with Starbucks. And that was not a campaign that the BDS movement called for. That was a campaign that someone declared on social media and went viral with the young people. And they just all decided they want to boycott Starbucks. And we know, and the company did admit at some point that it harmed their bottom line a little bit. There were other cases where companies have admitted, or we have seen documented cases where companies have lost money, including American companies, but it was always not because of US activities. So, for example, McDonald's lost a lot of money, I think $2 billion, they said, something like that, but not because of US boycotts, but because of boycotts in the Arab world. So I think we would have had a different conversation about this if we were in Dubai versus somewhere in Europe versus the United States. And we need to recognize that the United States, by and large, supports Israel, period. And we need to know where we have power, and we need to know what leverages we have and how to use them well. And when I say that divestment does not have a financial impact, it's not because I don't want it to. It's because that's the reality. So I make that distinction because I frequently see people who campaigners, organizers who come to us for help, and they can choose between different pools of money to target, the city pension fund or this other pension fund just for the firefighters, and the city's own, operating budget, and then there's like this other pool of money that someone else controls, and they think they need to be impactful, they need to target the biggest fund holder, the entity that holds the most money. And our approach is no, you need to focus your efforts on where you can win, because you probably can't move the pension fund, but you can probably move your city's own money. And so we want to get to the pension funds, and I think we will, but we're not there yet. And for some people, it might be a different calculation. It's really a case-by-case basis. It's not a rule. But really, I think it's the reality, what I'm describing.
Okay, that is very helpful. So essentially, this is strategic. In order to get to the point where the money is really, where there is a financial impact, we have to start with where we can move things and build from there. That sort of way. Okay, that is very helpful. Thank you. I'm going to be wrapping up here in a minute. Yeah, I have a few things to, yeah, okay, we're very close to 8:30. I think I got through most of the questions, and thank you all for having so many and being so engaged. And we do plan to continue this conversation in some way, because we want to get more involved in this. So let me just say a few things to wrap up. I want to again thank tonight's co-sponsors: Jewish Voice for Peace, Vermont, New Hampshire; American Friends Service Committee, New Hampshire; Community Church of Durham; United Church of Christ Movement for Palestine Solidarity; New Hampshire Council of Churches; 350 New Hampshire; UCC Peace with Justice Advocates; and Southern New Hampshire Indivisible. Let me mention we offered our programs generally free of charge, but we do welcome your support. nhpeaceaction.org/donate. And we hope that you will stay in touch with us, nhpeaceaction.org, to learn more about what we're working on, what events we planned, and like what next for this, for instance. Here's a quick preview of some things coming up. We are continuing our vigils. They were originally called ceasefire vigils. We're going to change our wording a little, but we know we have a long way to go. So we have the Vigil for a Just Peace for Palestine and Israel. That's kind of the current title. Tomorrow, Thursday, October 16th, noon to 1, people will be in City Plaza, Concord, New Hampshire. Wednesday, October 22nd, 2 to 3, will be at Representative Pappas's office on 3rd Street in Dover. Wednesday, October 29, 2 to 3, will be at outside Senator Shaheen's office in Dover. We have a few other things coming up online this Sunday, October 19th, 3 to 5 Eastern Time. There's a regional peace and justice gathering online. And this is to bring people together, to build relationships between organizations, and to welcome new folks in and get ready for action. There will be topics like building unusual coalitions, and bringing unions and peace movement folks together. Free and open to everyone. Our next Peace and Justice conversation is on Monday, October 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That's back to our 1-hour ones. And for that, we have Bob Sanders. He's going to join us to talk about riding against war on Gaza from California to New Hampshire. If you don't know, Bob did that this summer. He biked from California to New Hampshire, talking about and raising money around Palestine and particularly Gaza, and he's going to tell us all about it. Right, Bob? So with all of that said, I just, again, really want to thank Noam for taking this time to talk with us, educate us. I know I learned a lot. It seems from what I'm reading in the chat that many others did as well, and hopefully this will spur some action on it. And thanks to all of you for coming, for taking the time to look at this. Again, this is a strange moment when certain voices are telling us it's over, everything's fine. And of course, we know that is so far from true. However, what is good is we have built a much stronger movement. And so let's, instead of ceasing our action, we're going to keep at it and hopefully see more and more successes. And I think with that, I can say good night and take care, and we'll see you again another time. And thanks,
Thank you so much.
everyone.
Thank you.